Welcome everyone to Things That Go Crash Boom Bang. It's an amusing list of post-Halloween horror stories in our open edge environments, our customers' open edge environments. Now, a couple of things before I get started. This is a recorded session, so please, by all means, if you have questions, you can type them in the chat. We'll try to respond to your questions in the chat, but try to save them more towards for the Q&A session after the presentation. But I do want you to join the chat anyways. There's lots of questions. It's fun to get that interactive feel in the chat. So join the chat, turn it on, click on the chat button. Keep your questions for the Q&A session afterwards. All right, let's get started. All right, so before I start, who am I? Why do you need to listen to me? Well, I've been in this progress world for 26 years now, and I'm not a programmer. I've always been a technical consultant, a database consultant. I finished an engineering degree at McGill University in Montreal in 1994, and I joined a progress VAR soon after, right after I finished my engineering degree. And I've really been doing this kind of work since the beginning, technical, database, down, dirty, sysadmin kind of work. And that's really what gets me excited. It's what I really like to do. And what's fun about White Star Software is we have a really wide range of customers, right? Our smallest customer, 10 users. Largest customer, 15,000 concurrent users. So we really kind of get to see everything, and it's really exciting. So I really enjoy it. You know, and I get to work with some of the best DBAs in the world. Tom Bascom, Adam Backman, Dan Foreman. These are names you guys have known and heard. You've seen their presentations for 20, 30 years now. So I'm honored really to be able to put my name with these guys. And we're really thought leaders in the DBA space. We love to teach and we love to come to these presentations. We're always doing 5, 10, 20 presentations at every conference, and it's really what we love to do, whether it's with our customers or at these presentations. So before I get started with these disaster horror stories, crashes, and destruction, let's do some happy stuff first, all right? So in the chat, please tell me, what's the longest you guys have been up? The longest you've been up without interruption. My record at one customer, 4 years. And we came in, and the reason we found that it was 4 years was because the infrastructure people wanted to change the hardware, and we were actually scared to reboot the box. The box had never been rebooted for 4 years. We had no idea what would happen if we powered the box off and then powered it back on. So 4 years is the longest I've ever gone with a database up and running, application up and running with no interruption. So that was pretty cool. And we did migrate them successfully, just so you know. More happy stuff. Listen, unplanned outages are very rare. We support dozens, hundreds of customers around the world, so we kind of get to see a lot of things. ProTop itself monitors thousands of databases, like 200 terabytes. I checked today in our portal. We monitor over 200 terabytes of data. Nearly 250,000 users are connected to the databases that we monitor. So it's huge, but it's very rare. And we don't necessarily support all of these thousands of databases, right? ProTop is monitoring them, and we support some of those databases, but really it's kind of rare. We probably see 5 or 10, I call them career-defining moments, right? So not my career, your career. You're the DBA, you're the guy in charge, you're the one who picks up the phone and calls me and says, Paul, I'm in trouble, help, right? And we come in and we do our best not only to help you, but to teach you at the same time, really, because that's what we like to do. So we do about 5 or 10 of these a year, one every month, every couple of months, all right? And this is my shameless plug for ProTop. I don't want you to think that this is a ProTop sales pitch. It is not. But I do want to put this shameless plug in. And a lot of times we get ProTop customers after there's one of these career-defining moments, for lack of a better term, right? So, and a lot of times they're consulting customers. They're customers that know us well. They like to work with us. They just haven't installed ProTop yet, or they haven't purchased a ProTop subscription yet, and then the worst thing happens. And then we show them, you know what, ProTop saw this 11 hours ago. Here's the portal alerts that were generated, but because you're not a subscription customer, the alerts didn't go out to you, and you weren't able to act on the alerts for really dollars. You know, if you're 500 billion euro company in revenue, it's peanuts, the ProTop subscription. So really, I urge you to look at ProTop again. So that's the end of my shameless plug here. But I do really come and check out ProTop. The value is incredible versus what you get versus the cost. So really take a look at ProTop. Come to our booth and talk to us, please. All right, so let's get started. Now, if you have a really good story that you want to share, I really want to hear it. Come and meet us at the Q&A session. I'm going to try to leave some extra time at the end of my session so that we can do a Q&A and we can hear your horror stories. But you know what? If you've got a good one, let me know right now that you've got a good, juicy story that you want to share. So put that in the chat so we know to talk to you afterwards. All right, let's get started. We're going to start with the boneheaded sysadmin of the year award. Now, the only person more dangerous than a programmer is a system administrator. Why? Because they have the keys to the entire kingdom. They have the keys to everything. They can do everything. They can delete everything. They can enable and disable anything. And if there's somebody who can do something destructive, it's a system administrator. So let's look at the nominees for boneheaded sysadmin of the year. Number 1, the server name change. This happened. We call the customer up. Hey, we got an alert that your database is down. Sysadmin is like, no, hold on a second. Ring, 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 ring. What happened? You guessed it. You can see it on the screen. They changed the server name live in the middle of the day. Progress, the database server noticed the name, said, hey, this log file is for a different server on a different name. I need to crash the database now because the log file doesn't the log file doesn't apply to the server name that I'm on, and so the database came down in the middle of the day. So lesson learned here, don't change the name of the server on the fly while the databases are running. Your database is going to crash. Number 2, we don't need no stinking LUNs. So in today's environment, we have shared storage, shared SANs, and you have SAN administrators. They administer the SANs. You've got Unix administrators. You got Windows system administrators. Everyone's got their own little kingdom. Well, guess what? At this customer, the SAN administrator decided that he was going to reassign the production database disk LUNs to the dev server. I don't know why. Don't ask me why. He had a piece of paper in front of him that said he had to do it, or he misunderstood something, or maybe he just didn't have enough coffee this morning when he got started. But we got the call to say everything's down, everything's gone, there's nothing left. And when we did the postmortem, well, guess what? All the production database drives were now connected to the dev server. Excellent. Bravo. Bravo, Mr. System Administrator. Thank you very much. All right, our next nominee. Let me see. I'm on Amazon EC2. I've got a server called US Prod. This is my test server. Let me terminate it. Right click, instant state, terminate. Oh, US Prod is a production server? I didn't know. I thought this was a test server. Sorry. So watch out for that. And the winner, who is the winner of our most boneheaded sysadmin of the year? Here it is. The backup restorer. So here is a sysadmin, not an OpenEdge DBA, a sysadmin who comes in the morning and the system is down. And so what does he do? He executes the 1 or 2 progress commands that he knows, decides that he needs to restore the backup. So he takes his backup, finds his little list of commands, types ProRest, database backup file, enter. It restores, runs his little script to start the database. Everything comes up. He thinks he did his job. He's happy. All right, we're all good. Except the users start complaining that there's data missing. So then after all this happens, I get the phone call. Gee, Paul, what's going on? So we come in, we start looking around. This guy restored a 6-month-old backup on top of production. Backups had stopped working 6 months ago. No after imaging was enabled. Nothing was enabled. He overwrote the production database. There's absolutely nothing I can do. And I have to admit, this is the one and only time in my career where I had to put the phone on mute because I started laughing. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm so embarrassed. I started laughing. What am I supposed to do? I can't tell this guy anything. 6 months of data completely wiped out, and there's nothing I can do. The other question I asked, did he lose his job? No, unionized. This was public sector workers. Unionized workers, they chalked it up to, I don't know, we didn't train him enough. I don't know. Of course, it's never their fault with public sector workers here. So he kept his job. They lost 6 months of data. I don't know what they did afterwards. They had to figure out how to rekey it. He is the winner of our Boneheaded Sysadmin of the Year award. Congratulations. I won't name him. You don't know him. It's all right. Luckiest Customer of the Year award goes to one of Tom Bascom's customers. So this happened a couple of years ago. Tom implemented after imaging at this customer. He set them all up with the scripts. We always install ProTop at our consulting customers, but they didn't want to enable ProTop because they didn't have the budget for it this year. They were going to look at it next year. Well, guess what? They never turned on their backup scripts or their AI archiving scripts. None of that ever got enabled. And a year later, they crashed, corrupt database. And so they call Tom up and they're like, Tom, we're down, we're corrupt. And he's like, no problem. We put in after imaging last year. We'll just restore the backup, roll forward AI, and we'll be off. Everything's great. Except Tom logs in and realizes backups have not been running for a year and AIs have not been purged for a year. Nothing is going on. Well, they did such a poor job of implementing the things that Tom gave to them that in fact nothing was deleted. They had all the AI files for the entire year. And so what Tom ended up doing, and this is hilarious, you can ask him about it later, come to the booth. He ended up restoring the backup that he created a year ago when he enabled after imaging, and he rolled forward a year's worth of after image files. Now this took a couple of days to do, but they didn't lose any data. There is no alternate solution. There was nothing else. Their data was corrupt. So these people win the award for the luckiest customer of the year. All right. When was the time that the bonehead was me? This is way back, way back in the day, probably in the 1990s when I first started my open edge career. I was young, I was green, I was inexperienced. It was so old that Progress Media actually came on a physical media. And so I had to install Progress. I put the tape into the machine. I was at the console. You know, you hit enter, enter, enter on the keyboard. Nothing happened. So, look, and there's the console. There's the monitor. I start going click, click, click. Is the monitor on? Is the monitor off? Click, 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 click. All of a sudden, I'm sitting there. And the system administrator comes running in and he's like, what's going on? What's going on? I don't know. I'm like, I'm just trying to restore the tape, but the monitor doesn't work. And the poor guy, the look on his face, he does the face plant. Well, on this server, and I don't remember if it was an HPUX box or if it was a Solaris box. Some of the other old people here might remember, but the power on-off switch of the server was actually the power on-off switch of the monitor. So bonehead me, 26 years old, fresh out of university, all I wanted to do was install Progress. And what did I do? I hard powered off the server from the power off button because some idiot engineer decided that it was a good idea to put the power on off on the monitor for the entire server. That was my boneheaded day of the year when I was back around 26 years old. All right. Let's switch tactics to infrastructure. I'll take infrastructure for $200, Alex. And the question is, this should never be installed under a roof air conditioning unit. Let's hear, what should never be installed under a roof air conditioning unit? Remember, this is Jeopardy. You have to formulate your answer as a question. Put it in the chat. What should never be installed under a roof air conditioning unit? Who's there? Anyone? Tell me. 3, 2, 1. A server room. Never install a server room under a roof air conditioning unit. The roof air conditioning unit broke and water started pouring into the computer room. Now, this customer got insanely lucky. Nothing actually went down. The water started pouring and they were able to cover the servers that were affected. They were able to cover them. They had some tarps. Don't ask me why they had tarps, but they had some plastic tarps. They were able to cover the servers quickly enough that there was no damage. So another super lucky customer, but hilarious to see water pouring into this customer server room because they installed it right under that air conditioning unit. Hilarious, well, hilarious for me. I wasn't the one who had to deal with this problem. All right. Number two things that go together like oil and water in the IT world. All right, this is going to be a hard one. No one's going to get this one. But this actually happened. I was on site at a customer in Europe. I was on your side of the pond when this happened. They might actually be in the talk here. So don't say anything. I didn't mention any names. They might actually be here in this session now. We're working. The fire alarm goes off. So we're like, oh, really? A fire drill now? I'm here in this European country. I'm only here for a few days and we're going to waste an afternoon on a fire drill. So we leave the building. We're outside. Everyone's kind of standing around in the parking lot waiting to see what's going to happen. And then we see real smoke coming out of the building and we're like, oh, this is not a fire drill. Well, it turns out that a fire started in the electrical room and it took out the entire building. This is a 13-story building. The entire building, poof, no electricity, right? Everything's off. Now, what's interesting is the servers are not physically in that building, so they didn't have any actual problems with their database servers or any of their other servers. Those were in some hardened data center somewhere else. But guess what? Nobody could work. Nobody could work. Now, this was a company that did have an actual disaster recovery plan. So they did have rental locations in a special place where they could go. They had a real DR plan. So they were able to take their key employees to a DR center that could access their computers. And they were at least able to do the minimum amount of work for the day to keep the business going. And to their credit, imagine fire in the electrical room. The next day, everyone was back at work. So they worked through the entire night to clean the fire, pull out whatever problem or whatever was burnt out of there, replace all the electrical things that were broken. And the next day we were back up and running in the office. Everything worked, phones, computers, everything was back up and running like nothing happened. So that was impressive. I can't imagine how much money the company spent that day just to get the things working. All right, let's keep going. Redundant single points of failure. This was another hilarious one. Customers, all of you, right? You have your servers, you have redundant power supplies in the rack, you have power strips on each side. You plug each power supply into the power strip. Everything's redundant, except that this customer, both power strips went back to the same circuit in the electrical panel. So when the breaker popped, guess what happened? Both power supplies went out for the entire rack. The entire rack went out. Every server, every disk, anything in that rack completely lost because they had put both power bars on the same circuit in the electrical power. Single points of failures, 2 redundant single points of failures. You're like, oh, seriously? Seriously, people? Come on, this is inexcusable stuff. But again, in retrospect, pretty funny kind of thing. All right, how about you? What's your best infrastructure horror story, right? So we haven't really gone to the OpenEdge side of things. I've been talking about sysadmins and infrastructure and things that go boom. And honestly, most of the time when we see one of these career-defining moments, it's an infrastructure problem or a human error. Very, very rarely is it a pure OpenEdge issue that occurs and gives you one of these problems. Now it's time to talk about the really ugly stuff, the really down and dirty stuff. You know, if water falls into the computer room, you can't really blame someone. If an electrician screws up on the electrical panel, you can't really, blame the DBA or the sysadmin. But some of these things here now we're going to talk about, these are really ugly, ugly things. All right, here we go. First one, really ugly. This also happened just a couple of years ago. vMotion. So how many people here are on VMware ESX and everyone tells you, oh, you can vMotion, SAN vMotion, you can do all of this live. It doesn't affect the system, it might slow down a little bit, but you can do everything live. Well, that's what this client thought. He did a vMotion, SAN vMotion live. Well, guess what? He hit some VMware bug somewhere. We found it afterwards. But what really happened was he corrupted everything. He corrupted his database, he corrupted his backups, he corrupted his AI files, he corrupted everything. Was destroyed, completely destroyed. And for a number of reasons, there was no DR plan really in place. There was some replication, some stuff in place, but not really done properly, I'm going to say. And this customer we ended up doing an emergency dump and load. And this was a dump and load of a corrupt database, which means we dumped until we hit corruption. We would have to drop the block. So this block, 64 records, gone. And keep dumping. It took 30 hours to dump and load this database. It took them a month afterwards to recover from the logical corruption once we got them back to a physically good database. So imagine here, one little SAN vMotion. So you want to do that? Cross your fingers before you do your SAN vMotion. And if you ask me, I'm going to tell you, don't do it. Don't do it hot, please. Next one, Nutanix. Who has heard of these hyper-converged servers? These people are trying to sell you things that auto-magically fix all of your problems, performance, sharing of resources. Just buy this black box. It costs €1 million, but it's going to run your entire business and you don't have to worry about it. It's beautiful. And you look on the screen here, you'll see this is a ProTop customer, so we have all the data. And the customer started complaining, and we started seeing the data on the graph, right? And at one point, the users were losing their minds. And we're like, this is the Nutanix. The problem is your Nutanix box. And of course, the Nutanix people are telling us, no, everything's fine. The box isn't doing anything. It's your application. It's progress. It's always Progress's fault. So we said to them, listen, we still have the old infrastructure. Let's go back to the old servers, see what happens. All right. And if it's bad, if it's bad, we'll keep digging. And if it's good, you're going to start digging. Well, guess what? You can see right on the graph there around May 16th, we moved them back to the old infrastructure and performance was perfect. Everyone's like, oh, it's great. You fixed the problem. No, we didn't fix the problem. Not even close to fix the problem. So we ran like that for a couple of days, moved it back to the new infrastructure. Of course, the problem came right back. And what's interesting about this graph that you see on the screen, you can actually see it's getting exponentially worse as time is going by, and the business is losing its mind. This is a €500 million business, roughly, maybe 800 concurrent users on the system, and they're losing their minds. And finally, the Nutanix guys came back to us and said, oh, I think it might be this bug. Let's apply this patch. And you can see exactly when they installed the patch and the problem went away. So lessons learned here. One of the advantages of having something like ProTop is we trend the data. We trend years and years of data. So when something changes in your infrastructure, we have the data to go back to the infrastructure guys and say, look, clearly something changed on this date. You can see it on the graph. We didn't change the application. We didn't change the progress version. What changed on this date? Oh, we migrated from the old infrastructure to the new infrastructure. Don't tell me that the infrastructure is not related, because I have data proof that there was a change to the system. And so that's a really great reason to have this historical data, as much about the database metrics as what you're seeing on the screen here, which are infrastructure metrics that we trend with ProTop. All right, Nutanix hyperdestruction. Next one, database corruption. Listen, I don't have one specific example. We probably see database corruption a couple of times a year. Sometimes it's a progress bug. Usually it's an infrastructure problem. So usually there's a disk that goes bad, or a card or something along the way starts to corrupt. I'm actually working on one right now, a customer who's corrupted their database, and so they went down. We fixed the corruption, but they never found the hardware problem, and they're migrating to Azure. So they're migrating into the cloud. So they're like, okay, We're going to limp along for another couple of weeks until we migrate to Azure. Well, guess what? We started doing the dump and load testing this week. We're supposed to migrate them on the weekend, and guess what? New corruption in the database. So we know there's an infrastructure problem here. They need to get off this hardware as quickly as possible. So we see this kind of thing again a couple of times a year, 2-3 times a year. We see this kind of infrastructure issue, database corruption issue with the databases. And the reality is if you guys do your job properly, you'll have backups, you'll have after imaging, you'll have written procedures on how to restore and roll forward, because chances are when the worst happens, you're going to be on vacation. The one guy who knows how to do it is going to be on a beach in Santorini, and he's not going to want to log in remotely to do a database restore and roll forward. So you have to have the data in place, the backups, you have to have the after imaging in place. All of these things have to be in place, but you have to have the written procedures and assume that it's your boss that's going to have to execute those procedures. So write them down step by step by step. You need all of these things. Otherwise, it's just ad hoc. You're kind of crossing your fingers that when the problem occurs, you're going to be able to recover from it, right? So watch out for DB corruption. But again, it happens too many times, a couple of times a year, for us to give you specific examples here. All right. Here's another one of my favorite. These last two are two of my favorite examples. Open Edge replication. So here's a large customer. They have a terabyte database, 4,000 concurrent users. They're running Open Edge replication. We actually been doing consulting with them. So again, we've got Protop is there. Protop is monitoring their environment, but they haven't signed a Protop subscription, so there's no alerts actually going out. So Protop is monitoring, it's generating alerts into the portal, but nobody's watching anything. Nobody's getting email alerts or SMS alerts in any way, shape, or form. And just by pure chance, this was actually over the Christmas holidays. And I noticed on January 1st or 2nd, by looking at the portal, that, oh, you know, they're getting some replication alerts. So I start to look and their replication had been down for 10 days and nobody noticed because they have terabytes of disk space. So nobody noticed. They hadn't had a good backup in over a week because they filled all their AI extents. So they couldn't back up the database. They had 100 gigs of locked AI extents on the production box. No replication, no nothing. This is a 24/7 customer. We called them up and I'm like, listen, this is going on. Clearly you're not aware. You need to deal with this problem. And again, like it happens happens so many times, these are customers that after these kinds of events occur once, twice, 3 times, finally they understand the value of having a Protop subscription, right? If they had gone down, if I had not picked up the phone, even though they weren't a Protop customer, I still picked up the phone and said, I saw this, you need to deal with this. And we dealt with this. We fixed the problem for sure. But had they not dealt with that problem, they would have ended up with massive outages by the time. And then imagine now, this is a terabyte, remember 1.5 terabyte database. So even rebasing replication, sending a terabyte from one side of the United States to the other side of the United States is another huge endeavor in itself to rebase replication. So really a big problem there. So you need to monitor replication. You need to watch out for that. All right, I think this is my last example. I'm trying to remember. Speaking of 100 gigs, customer crashes. So we get the phone call. Again, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself. A consulting customer who had Protop installed was not paying for an alerting subscription, so we weren't getting any long transaction alerts. We weren't getting any BI alerts. And when we looked afterwards, we saw all the alerts were there. They had been there for hours. Long transaction, BI growing. The BI grew to over 100 gigs in size. And the database crashed when it ran out of disk space. So what did we do? We added more disk space, no choice. So we added another 150 gigs of disk space. At this point, we don't know if it's just an old transaction that's not going to add any more BI when it has to undo the transaction, or if it was really doing something crazy that was generating 100 gigs. So we said, to be safe, put another 150 gigs on the BI file system, fire up the database. 4 hours to go through undo, redo processing, to go through that 100 gigabit 100 gigabyte file and bring the database back up. So imagine they're down for 4 hours and there's nothing you can do. You're telling the customer there's absolutely nothing we can do. The database has to go through undo, redo processing, has to go through the entire 100 something gigabyte file before the database can come back up, you know. And back in that version, this was in version 10 something, I don't remember, it wasn't as verbose as it is today to tell you where it is in the undo redo processing. So really you can only guesstimate based on disk IO bandwidth usage to see how much of that 100 plus gig BI file had been read. So imagine that 100 gig BI, 4 hours of downtime just because of an old transaction. Insane. All right, so I must be out of my time. Tell me in the chat, what was your favorite of these crash, boom, bang examples that I gave you today? And we have so many more stories, but I must be at 40 minutes by now. I'm running out of time. So I want to hear your stories. You can put them in the chat. We're all going to shift over to the Zoom Q&A now anyway, so meet me over on the Zoom side. So reminder, if you're in theater mode, you need to exit theater mode so you can see the link to enter the Q&A, to enter the Zoom session. I'll see you over there. I'm looking forward to hearing your stories, looking forward to hearing your comments. So I'll see you over there. See you on the other side. Thank you very much for your time. All right, have a good day.